tour of British debaters of the United States is the longest running international debate tour there is, going on since
1922.
1922. That's a long time. Not even I was born yet. Okay? I know I look much younger than I really am. And so I want to call on Sam to introduce our guests, and then we'll get going. We're going to have the workshop for debaters up here. We're going to have the workshop for judges immediately underneath in 108. We have video cameras for each one, so if you want to go to sleep and then watch it later on Google Video, that's fine, because that's what freedom's all about. So I want to thank Sam Nelson for this and introduce him from Cornell.
So it's been my pleasure to plan this 30-city tour that the British National Debate Team has just embarked upon. And it's the largest tour that we've done in quite some time. And I was actually surprised that they sent such august members over to represent Britain this time. First of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Alex Just. He became a professor when I checked him into the first hotel. Extra amenities. But Alex is actually the current president of the Oxford Debate Union, probably the most famous debate union in the world, next to the Cornell. And he's an interesting guy, very witty and pretty. One of the topics that they're willing to debate, whether it's better to be pretty or witty. He's both, so it's a multi-guidance. And it's a pleasure to have Alex here. Let's have a round of applause. His traveling partner is Lord Alistair Cormac, actual member of the royal family that they were able to bring here. And he's also from the University of Durham. Excuse me.
I went to Durham.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure they have a statue there too. Yeah. So, and has quite a bit of experience debating and judging debate, and I feel extremely honored that he has come along as Alex's chauffeur, butler. Thank you.
We're all ready to go. I'm Alex, Professor Just. This is my first lecture on US soil, so I'm very excited to be here. Basically, what I'm going to do, because we've got about an hour and a half, is to go through a very quick introduction to what BP, British Parliamentary Debate, is. At any point during my speech, or while I'm talking sort of at you, we're going to make it quite interactive, so I'm afraid you have to come and stand up front and do things. Just if you don't understand what I'm saying, because I'm using funny English, Scottish words, or if just my natural lilt is making you drift off and dream of green fields and stuff, just yell, shout, stop, get me to do anything again. We've made some kind of rough, Gina's kindly printed out a kind of rough guide to what you have to expect today as far as judging and the different roles that the speakers have. But there's loads of resources online, which, and some of you looked at stuff already on the internet, yeah, about BP. So I'll just assume that you don't know anything, which is basically how we approach all Americans.
Just wait till later.
Actually, we're calling it the Worlds format because we would like to go to the Worlds, and someone just asked me, what am I hearing about BP for? I'm here for Worlds. So.
Yeah, well, because Britain is the British parliamentary style that is used at the World Championships, you can call it Worlds. We just call it BP. It's a little bit of British branding. So no worries, it's exactly the same thing. So basically, what I'm going to do is first of all talk a little bit about the format, exactly how it differs from policy debate, and what you need to expect from each of the different speakers, because they all have quite a different role to play in the debate. Then we're going to go through how you'd actually do a debate, so go through each speaker and break down the things that they're expected to do. And finally, look at how to win. So that's where you kind of think about the strategies involved and the things that will be slightly different in terms of how the judges and what Alan will be saying downstairs. Obviously all the things that you guys need to know to pick up rounds today. So I need to start by telling you the format. And to do that, I need to have some volunteers. So can you guys come out here? We need some people from the back. I need 8 of you. So I need volunteer or I just pluck you out. So 2 of you over here. I'm going to go over there. 2 of you over here. No, that's all right. Only 8. Only 8. Don't hold one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, you guys. You come. So you have to go away. One of you has to go away. So 4 on this side. That's good. Right, I need to kind of move around. So you come on this side. That's awesome. Right. So this side is going to be the government, the affirmative bench, and this side is the opposition. And the whole kind of way that this format developed comes from British Parliament and the kind of parliamentary system where you have a government and an opposition and they face off against each other. But unlike in policy debate and most other debate formats, the benches actually are composed of 2 separate teams. So if you think of this as the government side, this is our first government or first proposition. This is the second proposition side. This is the first opposition side, and this is the second opposition side. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because obviously the people on this side all have to argue in favour of a particular motion. So you'll have a resolution, and that's what you debate, and we'll talk about how you can think about resolutions in a second. And this team will start the debate off, but their colleagues who speak after them will have to sort of be in like a coalition. So they'll have to agree with everything that's been said already, but they're also trying to win the debate. So you'll have debates sometimes where it won't be all of the speakers on one side who will like win. So you could have a situation where like this team came first, this team came second, this team came third, and this team came last. That's not going to happen. That's really good. But it's basically, and that's like the strategy stuff, which we'll do at the end about how you win debates. But all the speeches today will be 5 minutes, 7 minutes long. Tune's gone. It doesn't really matter. 7? Okay, 7 minutes long. So you can speak for 7 minutes. You're kind of supposed to use all of your time. And what happens is the first and last minute of the speech is protected. So that's time when nobody else can interrupt what you're saying. But during other times, so those 5 minutes in the middle, people will be able to interrupt. And we'll go through that in a second when we look at how to do this. So if we can have the first proposition speaker come up here. If you give him a round of applause. More enthusiasm. This guy's going to have to make a first proposition speech now. You don't really. It's fine. You're smart. So the first proposition speaker has a number of jobs to do in the world's debate. The first is that they have to define the resolution. So they've got to explain what the key words in a motion are. And because we do lots and lots of different resolutions and loads of different topics, and the tournament that you're going to do today and tomorrow is going to range from lots and lots of different things that Tudor's put together. But the important thing to start the debate off strongly is to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? So you need to clarify what the key words in a topic would be. So say the resolution was this house would abolish zoos. Go at the back, what would be the words that you need to explain to everyone to get them on the same page?
First of all, I would define which house it is, as well as the word abolish.
So house and abolish would be your 2 words. Any other words? Zoos would be the other one. Now, that's a good point. So house, generally that doesn't matter very much in this format. The house is just everybody who's in the audience. So you don't usually narrow it down to say the house is the US Congress or the European Parliament or anything like that. It's just a general way that you phrase the topic. So the debate just exists in a kind of, not quite a vacuum, but it's just supposed to be the here and now, trying to persuade people who are in the audience. So that's what the house is, and that'll be the same every time. So abolish would obviously be the first word. So your definition of abolish, plain, common explanation would be?
Completely ban.
Yeah, just completely ban, shut down, get rid of. And a zoo, what's the definition of a zoo?
British Parliament.
You should go to the So a fenced-in area, housing animals of any varieties, that's okay, that's not too bad. But yeah, maybe. I mean, Ali, has a kind of travelling assortment of animals, a menagerie that come with us on the tour, that he just puts in the back garden of wherever we're staying, some snakes, some horses. Is that a zoo?
No.
No. What's the other kind of element of a zoo? Usually.
Open.
Yeah, excellent. So it's like open to the public. So it's a place where people would go usually and maybe pay, or it might be subsidised, and they'd go look at animals in enclosures, and that would be what a zoo is. So in this format, it's really important that at the beginning of the debate, all the key words are actually explained properly, because you have a similar kind of thing in policy debate, right, where people will talk about something and then people will disagree about whether or not that's the topic you should actually be discussing, and if they're properly on topic. So for all the debates today and tomorrow, the first people who speak are going to stand up and clearly outline exactly what it is that the debate's about. So in the debate about abolishing zoos, the way that you define it would be to say, what we're going to propose is that the US government should, because you can do that. Basically, if you're debating in the US and you're all Americans, then it's fine to put that general framework in place. When you go to the World Championships, you can't do that because everyone comes from a different place, which is why we have this house as a kind of general thing. But for today, it's fine if you want to make it an American thing. So your policy would just be, you pass a bill banning zoos. You maybe want to think about what you do with the animals. Might have some kind of policy. So again, that will differ depending on the debate. Some debates will need to put in place a very detailed list of things that you need to do. So you might want to let the animals that are currently in captivity die, or you might want to unleash them in Manhattan, just let them kind of wander free. But that's up to you, so you get to decide that. And that's something that the first speaker has to do. What you then do is outline the case for your side. So that's like the roadmap, which is what you call it in policy. Is that right? Yeah? Yeah. If I'm using any policy terms incorrectly, being heretical, then just tell me, because we're getting to grips with that too. So you'll say, my speech is going to have the following 2 or 3 arguments in it, and my partner's speech is going to have the next 2 arguments. Usually the case division will be like 2 or 3 arguments in the first speech, maybe 2 in the second. And those arguments you'll decide in the preparation room. So you get half an hour between the words, the resolution being read out, and going into the debate to think up all the arguments that you can, and we'll have a look at how you might do that in a second. But once you lay out the roadmap, you then just go through your arguments, make your points in exactly the same way that you would in a policy debate, although the way in which you actually make the arguments and the use of evidence is a little different, but we'll go through that as well. And then you'll have a nice conclusion at the end, and then you sit down. So that was great. Well done. Give them a round of applause. So that's the first proposition speech. Everybody relatively clear on that? Any questions about what he does? Cool. So now we'll call up the first opposition speaker. And what she has to do is pretty similar to what the first proposition speaker has to do. You've got to lay out the roadmap for your team, so just explain the headlines, the 2 arguments you're going to make, and the 2 arguments your partner's going to make. And then if the definition has been really bad, if he's defined a zoo like you did to start with as the British Parliament, which obviously isn't the plain meaning of what a zoo is, then you're allowed to say, we think this is bad, this is wrong, and you can redefine the terms of the debate. However, generally when this happens, the debate breaks down and it really sucks, because then all you talk about is the definition, and you don't actually get into any of the arguments. So generally what we tell people is that if you're going to, if you think that you can have the debate, and you can just kind of run with it without challenging the definition, then do that, because the judges will penalise the first team for screwing everything up and saying something really, really stupid. You can't define a debate that's a truism, or that's so narrow that the specialist knowledge that you need would mean that the other team wouldn't be able to debate properly. The format's supposed to be quite kind of equal, and you don't want to try and get little tricks on your side to help you win. So if there'd be a problem, which again there's not going to be, because this style of debate is going to run perfectly in the Northeast for the rest of time, because you guys as pioneers will not challenge definitions, you'll just move on, and first of all you'll go through the rebuttal of his speech. But this is different to policy in as much as you don't have to have a line-by-line flow of every argument that's made on the other side. You've only got 7 minutes, and because you're trying to persuade an audience, the really important thing is that you prioritize and like pick out the arguments which you think are the most important. So sometimes if a speech has got like, say the argument, someone was arguing about zoos because zoos are dangerous, we want to get rid of them because they're a public health risk, and very often like animals will escape and eat children. Now obviously that's a pretty stupid argument. You'd want to say that quite quickly and then move on to the bigger points that they might be making about like cruelty and the socializing impact that it has or whatever. So you've got to, when you're writing down the roadmap of the people speaking before you, work out which of the arguments you actually need to engage with and hit most sort of strongly and aggressively. And that rebuttal that you'd have at the beginning of your speech would maybe last for 2 minutes. So the balance of time that you spend attacking the opposition's arguments and sort of doing analysis of stuff that's happened already versus just new material like presenting constructive arguments obviously shifts as the debate goes on. So at the beginning, lots of new arguments, lots of kind of good stuff that you've thought about in the prep room. Later on, by the time we get to the end, these two speakers won't be making new arguments at all. The whole debate will kind of be, by the time we get to the 4 speeches, everything that's gone on already. And so you'll do a rebuttal, you'll then go through your own constructive points, make your 2 arguments or whatever, have a little summary, and that's another excellent 7-minute speech. Well done. So that's the opposition, and we'll do something on opposition strategy in How to Win in a sec. So then we have the second proposition speaker. Levels of enthusiasm for these guys. They're putting the work in as well. So your job is get slightly more complicated by this stage. So what you have to do is firstly go on the, well, it's up to you really. You've got to do 2 things. One of which is to go on the attack obviously and knock down the points that she's made in her constructive speech. The other thing is to help save your partner, because she just had his ass kicked by this first speaker, and this is just like the same kind of thing that you'll be doing in policy all the time. After cross-ex, you obviously have to rebuild the case and make things sound good again. So what you have to do is try and sort of save him and help him out. So you'll just go through the main bits of attack that have come from the other side, explain why you were actually right, then usually go on the offensive and attack them, and then after that you'll go through the constructive arguments that have been highlighted in the book. So it's pretty simple, that's what you'll do, and obviously you'll be trying to, again, like prioritize the important arguments, work out where the debate is kind of heading, and usually by this stage you'll begin to see, because you'll have had 5 or 6 arguments already out on the table that will be being discussed, and the ones which people are talking about most and that kind of will get the debate home towards the end will be the ones that you'll be focusing your analysis on. So that was a second proposition speech, so that was very good. Then we have second op. And what do you think you have to do?
Refute her points that she's made
Yep.
and introduce one more. Or,
Yeah, from the way back, you've got one other thing to do. So you've got to rebuild. Oh, that's the thing you have to do.
Rebuild my.
Yeah, rebuild. So the way that the speeches kind of move on through the debate is to rebuild, rebut, and construct. So those are like 3 little things you have to do. So, and it's really important. Like when I was teaching in the Middle East quite recently, and they're building lots of hotels at the moment. So like the way that basically you judge a world's format debate is to think of both of the teams like building a tower. And every time they build a new argument, they're adding a floor to the tower. But the other team is kind of sneaking into the construction site in the middle of the night and taking away bricks and like blowing stuff up and generally trying to knock down the tower. And what you have to do is constantly, it's a battle of building floors and then rebuilding ones that have been destroyed, trying to take down floors that the opposition have been putting up as well. And the winner in the debate at the end is just whoever has the tallest tower. So it's just a kind of battle to see who can either make the most constructive arguments and win. And sometimes in debates, like the teams will be quite evenly balanced, but one team will just have made more arguments, and the other is where you can really attack somebody, so you bring down their arguments so much, and you might have had some damage as well, but by the end you're kind of standing out on top. And that isn't too different to policy either, I'd imagine. Like the way that you generally assess which team has won is by looking at that. But obviously because there's 4 teams, the dynamic of how you judge it is slightly different. So you do your reconstruction, your rebuttal, and then your new material, and that's the end of your speech. So well done. So as you can see, this debate's really good. Very high standards. All the speeches have been excellent so far. But now we move into the second half of the debate, where things change a little. And we welcome the third speaker for the proposition. And what he has to do is slightly different, because obviously you'll still be going on the attack. You'll be kind of getting at the things that have been said by that last speaker in his independent material. You'll be doing some rebuilding, because you're on a coalition here, and so obviously if the other team has said something really, really dumb that there's no way to defend, that's okay. You don't have to defend absolutely every crazy thing that they say before you, but you do have to kind of maintain some loyalty, or that's, we value that in Britain, loyalty with our allies, especially you guys. You've been very nice to us. So it's the same kind of special relationship that you get, apart from the fact that you don't screw the other people over, which is a difference sometimes with us. So the third speaker has to do something called an extension, which is just adding some kind of new material or new analysis to the debate. And that has to be stuff which is kind of agreeing with the general vibe that the first team has given off. So you can't put an argument into the debate that totally contradicts the main philosophy that they've set up. And this will be kind of difficult to think about to start with, but when you go in to prepare for the debates, you should just kind of write down all the arguments you can think of for any resolution. So if it was this house would abolish zoos, you'll just go through the 10 points that you can think of. And then as the team before you kind of makes those arguments, just tick them off. And usually the arguments you've got left at the end can make some kind of extension. Sometimes the first team will drop the ball and miss a really big obvious argument. Like in the debate about zoos, they might not talk about zoos being cruel. And so if your extension is about how zoos are really cruel, and there's this horrible fundamental problem with them, or you've got some big philosophical objection to animals being put in cages and that's subverting the natural order of things and stuff, this is the speech where we'll make that. So the two ways you extend generally are either to broaden things out and take a kind of top-down approach and look at the debate in a wider philosophical context. Again, that's fine because you guys will have lots of shells already and things which you'll be used to putting those kind of frameworks into place. So it's going to be interesting to see how you adapt to this format, because actually I think policy debaters are probably in the best position of anyone I've ever taught to be able to do extensions, because you're so used to shifting one topic into hundreds of other different permutations and variations. So all you need to do is just pick out something that's basically not been said already, some principle that's not been used, and exploit that and try and further the case for your team. And that will be your 7 minutes, so excellent job, well done. And obviously the opposition, the first speaker, exactly the same thing, but for her side, so well done. And you'll just come up again with some kind of extension, and when the judges will be kind of looking out for that from these teams. So it's quite important in the first few rounds, because they're not as smart as you, most of them, and they're quite old, and generally probably won't know what's going on. So you need to say, in your third speech, here is my extension. This is the new argument I'd like to bring to the debate. Just in the early rounds, when it gets going, everyone will kind of appreciate that. I mean, in fact, we do it, even in the world's final, people will still say, this is what the very clear ground that we're going to lead the debate into is this. So the third speaker is make sure that you actually flag up and signpost quite clearly what the new argument that you're going to bring to the debate is an extension. Then we move to the last two speeches, which are slightly different again. So you can welcome the proposition speaker. And what he has to do is give a kind of summary of the debate, a narrative. And the important thing is that the last two speeches don't really have any new material in them at all. So you wouldn't be introducing any new arguments. And that's, I mean, you could maybe give some new examples, maybe a case study or something that you just thought up, or something that's quite good. Generally what we do in this format is to kind of front load the information. So most of the good arguments you'd be expecting, the strongest arguments would come out early in the first few speeches. And likewise, there's no real strategic advantage to you holding back stuff and not letting your partner say things in the extension. So what you'll be doing is just summing up what's happened. And that speech generally takes the form of a kind of biased narrative, which when we're explaining it to high school kids, we say, think of it a bit like a journalist reporting on an event. but you have to do it from one very fixed perspective. So it's like Fox News. You know, they've got their one opinion about a story or a general slant on something that's happened, but they'll always kind of come down on one side. And the subversive liberal press, they do the same as well, obviously, because we're apolitical. So what you'll do is go through the debate and talk about usually the three main areas of clash. And this is the clearest way, I think, to do this. So you'll think about the biggest questions that have come up in the debate. So in the debate about abolishing zoos, that might be firstly whether or not zoos are actually cruel to animals. And you'll have had arguments starting at the beginning with some kind of evidence and some reasons why zoos are cruel. That might have been responded to here. The extension then might have dealt with this a little bit further, thinking about the philosophy of all that kind of stuff, and then there might have been more responses. So you've just got to kind of sum up why everything in the debate means that your side has won. And you go through three different things. Sometimes we'll do a summary based on impacts of different groups in the debate. So a debate about healthcare, you might talk about, what does this debate mean in terms of patients, in terms of doctors, and in terms of society as a whole. And just finding like a framework to do that is something that you will just do on the job. Like, it's quite difficult to explain how you go about writing a summary speech. Before you go into the round, you'll have nothing on your paper at all. Maybe like some ideas about arguments that might come up, but you have to just write your speech as everything else is going on. That'll be absolutely fine. So once you've done that, you've gone through the three things. You'll also, for strategic reasons, trying to be kind of bigging up what your extension's been in the debate. Because obviously, if things were really, really good from this first team, and they did a lot of the running and made things sound really excellent to start with, then you want to slightly take the credit for that in a way. So you've got to convince the judges and the audience that the reason that the proposition side has won the debate is all because of this awesome extension that you had from that speech there. And that you've generally added the sophistication and analysis and all that stuff to the topic. So that's what you'll do. That's your 7 minutes. Good job. Finally, we have forethought. And she's got to do the same thing. Just go through the debate, give the narrative, come up with the three areas of clash, think of the groups that are being affected, and then sit down. And obviously at this stage, because this is where the debate ends, you really can't be bringing up any new material or anything that's like radically different. So you can't hide something until the very last speech, because there's no opportunity for anyone on the other side to respond. So we're all about fairness. It's a very prim and proper form of debate. We don't like tricks and stuff like that. So that's the forethought speech. Thanks to all the volunteers. So, are there any questions about the jobs that any of these guys have to do? Generally, we're all happy with the different roles. Yes.
So the second government op teams also have to, when they're introducing their extensions, also rebut and rebuild previous cases.
Yeah, I mean, the extent, like I was saying, the extent to which you rebuild will depend slightly on just how crazy or silly the arguments made before are. You are allowed to kind of slightly move away from the other team. Like you want to put clear water between the two teams, but you will have to respond to anything that's been said by the speaker who just stood up, because their rebuttal and their arguments will inherently have a lot of things which, in order to win the debate, you have to get on side with and back up the team who's spoken before you. One thing which you really can't do in this style of debate is what's called knife the team in front of you. So you can't say, well, they were rubbish and they talked absolute crap, and we're just going to ignore everything they've said and start the debate again. You've got to have that sense, it's a sort of loose coalition. That's the way that we tend to frame it. So it's all about consistency and loyalty, but also about, this is where it's kind of interesting fine line, about making sure the extension that you make makes you and your team kind of see better and ahead of the pack than the other team. So that's the sort of basic thing about the format. How to do it? Well, the practicalities of the thing will be that you'll get 30 minutes to prep. If you go to the World Championships, you only get 15. So you're getting double the time today that we normally have. In terms of actually how you prepare, you're not allowed any electronic materials or any sort of assistance from an outside source. You can't phone up your friend at the Pentagon or do anything like that if you've got a debate about foreign policy. You can take in printed materials, so quite often you'll see like debaters walk around with stacks of The Economist. The team from Rochester are already onto that one. They've got an Economist here, and that you can use as a kind of springboard, because quite often topics will be in the kind of news cycle. They'll be quite topical. So the way that you generally prepare is just to know a reasonable amount about a lot of topics, which is slightly different from policy insofar as you've got one kind of topic that you debate all year, but you obviously will have different shells and different kind of slats of the debate. And this year, you've got a variety of different countries and various different policies that you can put in place, so that should all be fine. But you will be like bouncing around loads and loads of really different issues today. And the important thing is to remember that while having some evidence is important, you don't need to cite things in anywhere near the level of detail that you do in a policy debate. But that's not to say you're allowed to make things up, because I know that this is one of the big questions and like problems that people have with parliamentary debate. And we're not here to format bash. We like all debate formats. We think they're all good in their own special way. But the important thing about BP is that you're trying to persuade an audience. And so you do need to establish some kind of credibility when you speak. And that means that if you just stand up and make up lies and just say stuff that's obviously not true, people can call you on it. But you won't generally want to ask people, could you please give me a direct reference for that? Can you tell me which academic journal those statistics come out of? Simply because it's unlikely in 15 minutes that you'll have all of the kind of cards of information that you guys will have in a policy round. So you'll need to construct your arguments in a way that does use evidence, but doesn't just rely on the evidence itself to kind of win the point. And again, bad policy debaters will probably do that. They'll just stand up and read a card out and not explain why it has anything to do with the resolution or the argument, or give any analysis to how you win a debate. And it's exactly the same in the world format. You've got to actually make some kind of direct link between what you're doing and the evidence that you might be presenting. So, the way that we... Julia?
Can I ask about, for example, it is within World's rules that I could bring an economist and read a paragraph out of it?
Yeah.
But what would people's reaction be if you were reading out of a magazine during your speech?
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be good. And when we look at kind of how to win and the way that it's judged, you'll see why. Because content and argumentation, while it's obviously really important, as it is in any format of debate, style and presentation and how you actually get an audience on side and speak to them is, in theory, kind of equally important. So you don't need to read out a whole reference, and certainly the speed at which some of you guys are able to speak and read, chill out today, because you really don't want to be going at that kind of pace. I'm talking too quickly now for a speech that you wanted to make in a parliamentary context. So it'll be fine. You just need to take it down a few notches. But the way that you construct an argument, basically, to make it really good in this format, is to make your argument sexy. Has anyone heard of sexy arguments before? He's a very sexy guy. Nobody else? You have, because I told you in the car yesterday. So we'll see if you guys can kind of work out what this is. So every argument starts with a word beginning with S. So if I say, that's a really nice shirt, I'm from England, Scotland, yeah, that's style, that's what I would say. Style. Statement's what we're looking for. Keep style in mind though, because it is important. So, you start every argument with a statement, and that's just like, in the roadmap, you'll have the first kind of thing. So, zoos are cruel animals is a statement. You want to follow that up with something with EX, what would that be? The explanation. Oh, awesome. Usually people say example, which is the wrong thing. So you then need to do the because bit, the explanation, and that's just where you kind of give the analysis, give some kind of link. So say zoos are cruel to animals because animals get put in tiny cages outside their natural environment. And then after that, you do the stuff which you guys will love, which you do loads anyway, which is to give something beginning with I. And illustration. Perfect. So that's just the evidence. And that will take different forms. So it might be like a statistic. You might have a copy of The Economist. So this one is about, nuclear power. So that's fine. If there's like a statistic about the percentage of France's economy that's run by nuclear power. You can put that in, that's fine. But it's not kind of the most important thing in the argument. You've got to, in this style, really show a clear and sophisticated level of analysis between all the statements that you're making around and giving the explanation. And then the illustration is kind of the icing on the cake, if you will. That's the last thing that you need to do. So that's just a very kind of easy way to think about how individual arguments break down. And it's not too different. I mean, is that similar to the order in which you present an argument in a policy round? Or is that how you do it in policy?
A lot of them wouldn't know.
Oh, you wouldn't know, because you're a policy novice too.
What was the question?
Like, how similar is that process to how you present like an argument that's part of a policy debate show?
I mean, I don't think it's actually
It's not similar.
no.
So would you maybe start with the evidence and yeah. Well, obviously that's different. You won't have like files of material, so you have to kind of bagels. You have to make it up slightly as you go along in the prep room. But again, what the judges will be looking for today is speeches which have arguments that are sexy. So you have to bring sexy back. And take those three things in turn. So once you've kind of got all your sexy arguments, then you obviously want to be starting to win rounds. So the way that we do judging is by thinking of three different kind of categories. One is content, one is style, and one is strategy. And really good speakers will do all of these things, kind of all of the time. I mean, it's not really possible to win a debate just on the basis of your content. So, like, you might, get a resolution that happens to be quite similar to a policy topic that you've debated before or something, and you know loads and loads about it. So you could be like an expert on, I don't know, air aviation legislation or something else, kind of very random and weird. You just did a class on something, and if you have lots and lots and lots of specialist knowledge, that can sometimes be a bit of a false friend in this format, because as well as putting up good content, like having good sexy arguments, you have to have style. So this is where we Brits will come over and explain to you how to be stylish. This is why we have our lovely matching ties and suits. It's not really about what you wear, that doesn't matter. It's just more about how you actually present your material. So you're supposed to speak in a way that can persuade the house, like the general public. So talking very, very quickly and reading stuff off a piece of paper, bad. Talking in a way that would kind of charm people and convince them that what you're saying is right and good is good. And like the way you do that will obviously vary depending on different types of speakers. And you don't have, there's not like a perfect style that debaters will have. If you watch like a really good world's debate, you'll have people from Australia, people from Canada. There's lots of good US speakers already around, and they'll all speak in a completely different way. But what they'll do generally is use lots of the more rhetorical techniques and generally mix around what they do with their voice to get people on side. So when we coach style usually, obviously we don't have time to do everything today. We might do an exercise. Yeah, we've got time. So we break style down into two things: verbal and non-verbal. Now, how many of you had to do like public speech classes at high school, or? Yeah, so you should be like pretty familiar with all this stuff. It's not too difficult, but basically the verbal stuff is just all the stuff using your voice. So if you imagine that you were giving a speech on the radio, like all the different techniques you use, what would be some of them? Let's go back to class for a second. Shout them out, things through your voice.
Tonal variation.
Yeah, tonal variation, so you don't want to be speaking in a monotone the whole time, because that will turn people to sleep. Anything else?
Hand gestures.
Yeah, well, that's not verbal. Hold that thought.
Volume.
Volume? Yeah, so if you speak like this the whole time when everyone's there, you'll lose your voice quite quickly. Mine's already a little hoarse. So you want to have shifts of volume. Yeah? Pace. Now pace is really important. Because again, like with policy, debate, the important thing is to get through your material, to get like all your cards finished, and to make sure that you say everything. I can now almost understand some kind of medium-paced policy debaters. We watched some YouTube clips yesterday of the CEDA finals, the nationals thing, last year. And some of those speeches you can, like a lay person, could sit and understand some of the stuff that's being said. But most of the time, I just have no idea what's going on. And what you've got to remember is your judges, because the topic is new every time, won't have the kind of knowledge and information and know the arguments until you present them. So you have to make sure that your pace is kind of in a place where it's, you know, listenable, for, if that's a word, for people who are watching and for the judges. And actually, that's not so much of a problem because you don't have, there's just not time in half an hour to write out every single word in a 7-minute speech. Plus, because your responses and the rebuttal and all this like analysis and the extension and the summary will all be written as you go along, unless you just speak very, very quickly yourself, and quite often like Scottish and Irish debaters do talk a little too fast, but you're not reading off a script, so you'll just hopefully naturally make sure that that kind of drops a little bit in terms of pace. And you've got 7 minutes, so that's actually quite a lot of time to do stuff if you organise and structure yourself well. So we had, what do you have, pace, tone, volume, yeah, that's most of the verbal stuff I think. Non-verbal things, you obviously identified gestures. Now these are quite important in this format because you've got to try and engage with your audience. So don't go and stand up when you're speaking with anything in your hand, because what you'll do is just naturally kind of play around with it and be distracting. So pens are not to be used, they're bad. You can't use any like audio visual aids, so PowerPoint slides, like actual holding up articles from The Economist or photos or anything, also not allowed. But your gestures and hand movements and stuff just need to be kind of natural. So you don't want to be getting too overexcited. So like there are some bad debaters in the UK who when they speak, because they, I don't know, you probably get some people in policy who will do this too. Have you ever seen people who do bird and like take off? This one really odd thing where this is one guy who, when he speaks the whole time, he like picks apples from the tree, like through his whole speech, and this is something to watch because whereas I mean in policy debate, really your style would count for how much of winning a round, percentage-wise? 0% if you're winning.
You do speaker points, which is considered separate from the
Right. So whereas in this format, the speaker points really will make up whether or not you will win the round. So I'm not sure how the ballots are being organised for this competition, but generally the way that judges will be taught is that content and style, they're kind of the two big things. You maybe get 40% of your mark, your speaker mark, and therefore your team mark, which is just made up of the two speaker marks together, will be based on these two things. And then the strategy is kind of 20% at the end. So you have to make sure that any of these little ticks or things that you do, like moving around as well as another one. So I saw a couple of debates where the speakers were kind of going all over the place and turning their back to the audience and doing stuff like that. You need to be very clear when you're speaking in parliamentary debates, and that means actually engaging with everyone in front of you. And that's why you have some debates, and actually good policy debates actually have elements of humour in them, so people will kind of get a bit more engaged and excited. But we like that today. So if you can think of jokes and just ways to kind of lighten the debates at times, that just means your style marks will generally be a bit higher. Yeah.
In terms of formality, how is potentially offensive language taken to?
Right.
I feel it gets the point across. Okay.
Okay. I mean, it's all about context in this situation. So you don't want to ever make arguments where you're making ad hominem remarks, so where you're just like slagging off other people. So you just say, oh, yeah, well, obviously you guys would say that you're from Cape Cod, like, people from Cape Cod are all losers, look at that, look what you're wearing, look at that shirt. I mean, how can we trust anything that this speaker just said? He's wearing a really goofy shirt. Ridiculous. Like, anything like that is really bad. Because it's like parliamentary standards of business. As far as like swearing and cursing and stuff, the bar just tends to be set by the debate community. If you guys want to have a style of debate where you can, F and blind and stuff the whole time, then that's fine. But you probably won't want to, because sometimes occasionally people get quite excited and they'll say, oh, that's bullshit. Let's move on and talk about something else. That could be okay, but it's up to you to decide whether or not that style is something that's going to be appropriate. And generally, offensive remarks where you're being, racist or homophobic or sexist or insulting any group for just because of who they are, that's all bad. So generally, like, nasty stuff doesn't go down well. And the judges will know that as well. You kind of, there's decorum. Tuna, did you have another question?
But at the Worlds,
Yeah.
right, it's probably a bit more formal.
Yeah. Obviously, if you went to a competition in Dublin, to one of the big intervarsity tournaments in Ireland, people will sometimes kind of drink during the rounds. By the late afternoon, people will be quite excited. Often the finals will be very raucous. I don't know if any of you have seen like the chambers that we have, the Oxford Union Chamber. You'll pack like 500 students in. There's balconies. People are hanging off them often by the end. And so the style and the kind of formality tends to drop a bit. Obviously at the World Championships, where you've got 400 teams from all over the world, it is very serious. Like, people are there to win the competition, and this is kind of the attitude that you should have today, because it's it'd be pretty cool to be the first team to win the inaugural. Do we have a name for this yet?
Yeah.
The Tuna World Championships practice in Vermont, 2007. But you want to take it relatively seriously, but you've got to have fun while you're doing it, because the thing about winning debates is that generally, if you're doing well, and I guess it's the same, like if you're kicking someone's ass in a policy debate, you'll loosen up a bit, you'll have a bit more fun, you'll kind of do the stuff which we associate with really good parliamentary speeches, which is to engage people and get them on side and kind of get them agreeing with you. That should be fine. Another question?
And the amount of levity you bring to the debate might have something to do with the motion.
Exactly. So,
Right? I mean, if the motion is about pedophilia, I'm not sure you would make jokes about it.
no.
Right, so that way, okay. And another thing I want to say is that this is the format for debate that all people around the world participate in.
Yeah.
And that sort of makes a difference, because it tends to be more welcoming of people where English is their second language. And are there any, does that mean your language choices need to be a little different, or what do you think?
If you got to the World Championships, you've got to be conscious of the fact that you'll be being judged by a panel usually of 3 people. Like, one of them might come from Slovenia, one might come from Oxford, one might come from Florida in the United States. And obviously, part of this whole content style, particularly the style thing, is trying to kind of get as many of those people on the side as possible. That doesn't mean that you ever sort of dumb down your language. So generally you want to just be as sophisticated as possible. In competitions where people are speaking English as a second language, like they kind of, the general idea is they're doing it in English. It's amazing that they can do it in English, but they don't get any extra credit for doing it. Like, very often the teams will just win because they'll be better in their content and style. But you don't say, well, that's nice, you're from Holland, so we'll give you 10 bonus points because you're speaking in English. Obviously today, for you guys, where everyone's on the same page slightly, insofar as you're all at school in the US, and you'll find that if you go to watch a debate in a British competition, the way that everyone will engage with each other and the kind of, the banter and stuff that will develop will be quite different to when you stick those teams into a world competition and they're in a pool with people from around the world. Which is why this thing about kind of keeping the topics fairly general and broad in their scope is meant to, again, equalize things, because you don't have the ability to narrow a field down and just talk about something that you know lots about. So you've got to be able to have a debate with someone from Botswana or who lives in the Antarctic, and they might not have done as much research or know about a topic as much as you do, but you have to kind of frame a debate in such a way that it's fair for them as well, so everyone's kind of playing by the same rules. There was a question there.
Yeah. Do you need to, like, it obviously would probably be better if you use all 7 minutes, would you lose points if you don't speak for a full 7 minutes?
Yes, if if you're speaking for like a lot less than 7 minutes. If you got to like 6 minutes 30, 6 minutes 45, and just decided you didn't have anything else to say, that's fine. You could sit down and no one would say too much. If you stood up for like 3 minutes and sat down, that obviously wouldn't be very good. Like generally, what you'll see is that the way people structure their speeches, particularly because of this style thing. Obviously, in a policy debate, you don't want to waste any time at all because you've got a limited amount of time. You've got lots of evidence that you want to get out. But if you're left with like 20 seconds, 30 seconds at the end, that's when people would like play up the rhetoric a bit and maybe slow down and zoom out and talk about the big picture. Like what you should be doing all the time is, and again I don't know how much you do this already, is the roadmap that you set out. You want to kind of repeat that fairly regularly as you go through the speech. So like signposting, is that a concept you're familiar with?
Yes.
Yep. So you need to do signposting, but and you obviously definitely need to do it in policy to keep people, to make sure people keep up with the flow and all the stuff you're saying. But in this format too, you need to say at the beginning what you're going to say in the roadmap, then go through each point and say it, and then at the end, kind of tell people what you've told them. So you'll find the first and last minute of a speech, and this links into the thing about points of information in a sec. They'll be kind of contained little units on their own. So you'll generally be fine with your last and first minute, which means you've only got to do 5 minutes in the middle of everything else. Okay.
Well, I have another issue because and I think this is a distinctly American issue. A lot, and we call it the we problem, is that Americans tend to use we to stand for the government of the United States and America in general. Now, in an international context, that's kind of weird, right? Because you are debating as global citizens, so that's, and I mean, my experience is that when you are in world's debate and you start referring to the U.S. government as we, you're likely to get the other teams really making fun of you for your narrow-minded, America-centric, we rule the world, and I don't really think, could you talk about that for a moment?
I mean, that's now complicated by the fact that you have Nintendo Wii. Adds another dimension to the mix.
Or the golfer.
Or the golfer. So we is something. I mean, again, it depends where you're debating, like Gina said. So today, if you're having rounds, it's perfectly okay to make sure that everybody's debating within the context of the United States. That's a sensible thing to do. Because on the whole, like the knowledge that you'll have about healthcare or a particular policy in your country should be high, because you're engaged citizens who know about stuff that's going on. And in the UK, people will just assume if you're proposing a motion and putting a policy in place, that will either work within the UK or maybe within like the European Union. But at World, you absolutely have to be just assuming that you're talking about either the concept as a general sort of principle that could apply anywhere. I mean, some rounds will be specific. So you might have a resolution like, something to do. So this House would invade Iraq. It was quite a popular topic to debate a few years ago. And what people could do there in a British parliamentary sort of world setting was to decide what policy they wanted to put in place. So you didn't need to act as the American government all the time. So in that debate, quite often what people would do is say, we're going to propose, we'll get together a coalition of states, and we think that this will involve the UK, the US, France, NATO, some other allies, and like whatever. You kind of put together the ideal package of whatever you want to do, and that will be what we'll be discussing today. So you don't always come at it from the perspective of this is our government. And even if the topic happens to be, so like there was a debate at the World Championships this year about independence for Quebec, and there were teams in the round I was debating who were from Canada, who knew a lot of stuff about it, but we ended up winning the round, and that was because the way that the format works doesn't give you a huge amount of advantage from you coming from that particular culture or from that context, because of the fact that the way you judge it is down to how good sexy the arguments are, and also to how good your style is and how much you persuade people. So if we look at the last thing, which is strategy, because we're going kind of, this is like quite a lot of stuff to throw at you, and the best way for you to learn is just to do some debates. Like, the first few rounds might be a little bit ropey and You know, I'm sure you'll all be able to speak to time, that's not going to be a problem. But obviously by tomorrow evening, when we get like the final of this competition, we'll be seeing all of this done really, really well. So then you'll think like, man, how at 9:30 on Saturday morning did we ever get from what we are to these amazing debaters? But the strategy side of things is kind of where it gets fun and quite interactive. So one element of strategy is points of information. So when I'm speaking, I'm not allowed to be interrupted in the first minute or the last minute of my speech, but for the rest of the time, anybody can just stand up or gesture and say, want a point of information. And that's all you can say. It's not like the United Nations, you can't have points of personal privilege, you can't have, I mean, you can have points of order, but that would only be if somebody was like being hideously offensive or was about to kind of hit someone over the head, or if like one of the speakers had collapsed or something like that. Like, it's only, I've never really seen a point of order in a debate before. So the only really one you need to know is point of information. And that's all you can say. So if you're standing up, so if you could, so I'm going to just keep speaking, and imagine I'm doing my speech.
Information.
And I've got 3 choices here. Now you have to stay standing. So, yeah, I mean, you can do this. There are different, like, cultural variations. Some people go in for the...
Tell us what that means.
I think, well, there are various descriptions of this. In the UK Parliament, I think, although I'm not actually sure it's true, but when you wanted to ask a question to somebody during certain times of the day, you had to be in like full kind of morning dress, and that involved having a hat. And so people went into the chamber to ask questions. They weren't wearing a hat, so they kind of get bits of paper and put them on their head to simulate having a hat on. Is that the story you've been told?
No, I heard it was to hold your wig on.
Oh, or to hold your wig on. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, if people have wigs, then that's fine. You'll do that anyway. Otherwise, I mean, you don't need to do it. Generally, you just stand up and you have to stand up. Question in the back.
Just back to the point of order real quick.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you're not allowed to come up with new points in the last 2 speeches.
Right.
Is it the team's responsibility to raise that point of order when that happens, or are you just leaving it to the judges?
No, the judges. I mean, obviously, if the person is speaking in 4th proposition and you notice in 4th op that they've like bundled in all this new stuff, you'd maybe say that in your speech. Be like, oh, well, that was interesting that they came up with these 5 new arguments. And kind of say that. Like the judges, if they're doing it properly, will point it out. I know certainly in the APTA format that you are allowed to kind of say new information, and then like the judge will say, okay, I'll think about that. And the round can be kind of won or lost on that specific point. In this format, that doesn't happen. You just have to get on with it and hope that the judge is good enough to work it out. Yeah.
You know if we're doing protected 4th speeches in this?
No, no. In some formats, like again in APTA, your kind of reply speech at the end will be completely protected. All the speakers have to have the same rules for their speeches. So all be 7 minutes, all first and last minute protected. So back to you. You'll be getting tired. So he stood up, you said,
Point of information.
and I've got 3 choices. I can say, no thank you, at which point you have to sit down. I could say yes, and then right away, he kind of takes over the floor. So you've got about between 5 and 10 seconds to ask me a question. So you can hit me with your point of information. You got nothing. That was good. So that's not the kind of thing you want to say. Usually a point of information will be like a kind of specific refutation of a point that's being made. I mean, it doesn't have to be absolutely on the point that they're making at that given time. So it might be that your team just have something that you want to put into the round, and you just need to wait for the right moment to make that point. Or you can say wait and just leave them kind of standing. And this is often the best thing to do, to just kind of get them to stand for 5 seconds or so while you come to the end of a point, because it's not a good idea to be in the middle of a sentence and in the middle of a point or argument and just go, yeah. Because you totally break your flow and it stops being sexy because you might be between the explanation and illustration or something. And you don't want that. So you're actually like, don't leave them standing up for ages, because that's not really fair. So those are the 3 things that you need to do. But it's important giving a POI, point of information. We like to make it sound cool. To not make like a mini speech. You're not just interjecting and giving your opinion or just saying, hey, you know, you didn't listen to me. I mean, you could say like, you didn't listen to what I said in my speech already. Could you respond to this point? But the important thing is to put the other person on the spot. Because, I mean, it's like, it's like good presidential debates when you watch them, or good political debates where you have the candidates actually asking direct questions to each other. In those cases, it will often be sort of scripted and prepared, so there is no genuine interaction. But here, what you want to do is make me kind of get knocked off balance a little bit. So make me answer a question or try and trip me up. Look for contradictions, assertions, like things that don't really make sense maybe between the two teams who've been in the debate already. Like all the same kind of stuff that you'd be looking at doing in a cross-ex. So if you think about it in that sense, from a policy perspective, you just have to answer the question. Once you've asked your question, you have to sit down, and you can't kind of do any follow-up. So you're in charge of the floor when you're speaking. The other person gets their 5-10 seconds to ask their question, and then that's it. They have to just sit down. Yeah.
And VP, do the POIs have to be phrased in the form of a question, or can you make a direct statement?
No, you don't have to. I mean, it just, again, it depends on the style and like how you want to phrase something. Generally, people, like if you ask a question, then obviously everyone will be expecting that speaker to give an answer. So very often, like, you'll just make statements into questions. So you'll have like a kind of thing that you want to put out there, and just say, "But sir, don't you believe that, or don't you agree that?" And then they'll obviously say no, and then move on from there. There's no like rule. And in terms of like, I suppose that's one thing to do with the formality of stuff and the format. Generally, when you're talking in the debate, the person chairing you're referred to as the speaker, and the debate sort of flows through them. So you start your speech by saying, "Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, fantastic to be here today and this debate." And you'll have your partner on this side. You can kind of, you don't need to say like the honourable gentleman or the honourable lady or any of that archaic parliamentary language. But people will often use the word speaker or chair, and that will just be just the way that, again, that's just a kind of linguistic thing that developed through the parliamentary setup. So yeah, POI is really important. But in a 7-minute speech, obviously you've got these 5 minutes when they can be made. You have to strike a balance between offering them and letting the debate flow. So what you need to do as a team is to make sure that both of you are making points of information. Kind of like a team should be making a point maybe every 25 to 30 seconds. I mean, when the debate gets going, you'll generally get quite excited, and I suspect if you've done other formats of debate where you can't ask points of information, at times you'll have wanted to just stand up and be like, "No, shut up, that's wrong. Here's actually what you should be saying." So that just, we're kind of liberating you from, and you're given the chance to do that in this style. But you can't ask kind of lots and lots of questions. You can't barrack people, and that's something which the judge will have to kind of think about. So if I'm speaking and you'll make another point of information again. So if I'm giving a speech and no thank you, and I'm speaking again, and then so you sit down, and then I talk for a little bit more.
Point of information.
No thank you, and then you keep talking again, and then
Point of information.
no thank you, and then you keep talking some more.
Point of information.
No, see how because you have to say no thank you or wait or whatever, it does actually break up people's speeches if you're constantly having people standing up. So a good rule of thumb is allow like 10 seconds between each point of information. So if another person or another team has made one, watch the clock. 10 seconds later, you can actually respond to it. Yeah.
You actually say point of information, or do you just stand up?
You say, generally, you don't have to say point of information because you don't just stand up in a debate. Generally, that's kind of rude because you should be listening to what they're saying. But actually, for the judges, will be not always looking up. And one thing to say is that although you don't need to make lots of points of information, you have to make, in a 7-minute speech, at least 3, I think, as an individual. Like 3 or 4 points of information. And obviously, like none of those could be accepted. So you might stand up 4 times and be told to sit down 4 times. But the judges will usually write down on their mark sheets how many times you've made points of information. And that will be, to some extent, what your strategy score is based on. That's just the level of engagement that you've had in the debate and the extent to which you've actually been willing to interact with the other team. Come back.
You may have mentioned this already, but how many points of information is it expected for the speaker to take?
Right, so in a speech of 7 minutes, where you've got this 5 minutes of time, I reckon you want to take 2, probably. You could take 3 if you wanted to, and again, this is like a strategic thing. If you don't feel that you've got enough content, because you're kind of running out of things to say, it's absolutely fine just to take another POI. And that will kind of give you another 30 seconds of material to pad the speech out with. You don't want to take like 4 or 5 or 6, because then inevitably your timing and like the way in which your content is being delivered is going to get really messed up, and you won't be making the arguments properly. So I mean, in 7 minutes, 1 is probably too few, 2 is just about right, 3 is perfectly acceptable. So that's the general kind of range that we're looking for. Yeah.
Just someone on proposition 1. Ask him what information for us to do.
No, because you're on the same team. So no, it's a good, like it's a perfectly sensible question to make, because obviously you do have this strange dynamic where you've got 2 different teams, but the only points of information you can make are at the speakers on the other side. So finally, we'll wrap up in like a couple of minutes. The last thing in terms of how you win a debate, and this is the stuff which you just have to learn on the job, because there's no real way, except if I ran you through like a whole debate and we watched the video, to kind of explain how you win a round. But the most important things to remember, just like the headlines for winning a world-star debate, are to make sure that you understand your role on the table. So if you're in the first half of the debate and you're speaking first, you have to give a good, solid definition. You have to explain what the debate's about. You've got to have your roadmap, and you've got to bring constructive, like positive argumentation into the debate. Likewise, if you're on the opposition, you have to respond to everything that's being said. You can't just ignore stuff, you can't drop the ball, you've got to engage with what they're saying, and also build a strong constructive case yourself. And then when you're in the second half, if you're speaking third, what do you have to have? An extension. So that's the thing which you all have to do today. You can't just kind of talk about general stuff that's happened in the debate. You've got to give some new kind of example, give some new good case study, talk about the debate in a broader philosophical sense, so that you're moving things forward. And then by the end, obviously, you're just kind of summing things up. So, although it might seem at first like it's really hard to decide which way around has gone, because you'd assume that if a debate is, because say the one about zoos, you might think that this team has really kicked ass, they're doing really well, and it's awesome, and there's no reason why anyone would want to keep a zoo open. But maybe when you break down the speakers in the first team might have been really boring. They might have read all their speeches, had nice arguments, but not got any star marks at all, pretty much. And the second speaker on that team might have taken no points of information. They would have made no points of information. That team could very easily take it forward. But then the team after them could kind of pick things up, get excited, get engaged, do all the good sexy things that we were talking about earlier, and win the round. And then you might have a kind of diagonal then, where the team in first opposition made quite good work at kind of attacking the boring people who spoke first, but they weren't quite as sophisticated as the team who were in second gov, so they maybe take a second, and then the third might just kind of fall into place there. And the way that, again, you see how rounds are won and lost will just be by doing them and watching them. Yeah. It depends slightly on how, like the way we like to do it. I don't know what the classrooms are like here, is that you'll have sort of tables, so you're facing your opposition. So you'd have like the first opposition team would be here, sit in these 2 seats, and the first opposition team would be here, and the judges would usually be sat, somewhere at the back. So people will stand from a table here, and they have the teams out in front of them, and you speak out there. Like sometimes, I mean, you do have debates where you might get like the first opposition team here, second opposition team here, the coffee in first proposition, and the donuts in second proposition. I think they might have quite a tough debate, but my money's on coffee in that one. So that would be the way it's set up. But all you need to do is obviously stuff like making eye contact and just generally being engaged and persuasive is very important, and that's where you can have fun today. And just kind of do some of the things which in policy, because of the rigor and the way that you present evidence, you don't always get a chance to. So like we said, we're kind of liberating you in a way, but we like the policy format a lot. So you can take lots of the stuff which you do already, and this is why I think it'll be interesting to see how you build extensions, because you should already be set up to do that really well. So hopefully the rounds will be quite good and hopefully quite fun. So any further questions? Judah.
I'm sorry, I'm curious. I was watching the final round at the Oxford Ivy, I think from 2004, on This House Would Temper the Ban on Torture.
Yeah.
And it seems like some speakers really like to say ladies and gentlemen all the time. Is that just the British version of
Ladies and gentlemen. Like another thing that you do if you're talking to a large audience. You know, you'd say, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, this is my point. And then in the end you say, so ladies and gentlemen, what have I told you today? And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I beg you propose. Like in any style of debate or public speech, you don't want to do things which are going to be repetitive and which will make people not listen to what you're saying. Because they'll be like, oh, he's picking the apple from the tree again. Or, you know, he's rocking from side to side like he's on a boat. Or he's using a particular phrase or sentence construction time and time again. You have to make stuff up, otherwise your style marks will be really bad. And so that's just the kind of common sense thing to do. The one final thing, which kind of actually goes back to what we were talking about right in the beginning, as far as debates go and the definitions, most of the time you'll be talking about a policy and implementing something, but it's possible there are debates today which might be slightly broader, where you might just be weighing up two kind of competing views or ideologies. So it might be something like this House would restrict civil liberties in the interest of national security. So that debate could be about, you know, suspending habeas corpus, or torturing people, or doing like, you know, the Patriot Act, like loads of different things in any given context. But what you'd be doing there is, and that tends to be called more of an analysis debate, where you, as first gov, don't have to put in place a detailed policy of where, in one specific instance, civil liberties can be restricted for national security. Instead, you're just kind of weighing up, putting in the scales these two things and saying, well, here's some maybe instances where it is good, here's some instances where it's not, but overall, you know, we come down on this side or we come down on that side. So don't get too freaked out if you do have and this is like a fairly new phenomenon in the world's format, and at the European Championships they had a policy round this year, an analysis round, where that's what you have to do. But generally, what you'll be doing is arguing something needs to change from the status quo to make some kind of gentle improvement. And obviously, you know, you guys know how to break down those things. So the, you know, very simple way for those of you who've never ever done a debate before, because there might be some proper novices here, is that we'd say, you know, I have a problem, Tuna's the solution, the gentleman who's just entered the room is the kind of outcome or desired result. And this, that's just, you can see the metamorphosis. And so the way to obviously engage in a debate like that, if you're the opposition, is either to say, I'm not a problem, there's nothing wrong with me. So in the debate, why are we laughing? Because it's true. Clearly, like in a debate about cruelty in zoos, you could say there's no problem because zoos aren't cruel to animals, they're awesome, they're fine. You don't need to change anything to the status quo. Or you can say, Tuna, fine man, but not the solution. He's not going to actually do what we want to because it doesn't work, and there are practical problems with putting him in place. Or maybe because Tuna doesn't, our outcome's gone, you're now work things happen to go along. So now this guy here with the pen in his ear is our solution. So you might say the link between Tuna and the gentleman here isn't very strong, so the opposition will try and, in this space here, knock everything down and say, look, we agree there's a problem. We even think that this might be a solution, but you haven't really proved that there's this link to get you to the outcome. Or in other situations, you might have like an outcome which the team agrees with the problem, they agree with the solution, they even agree that it will get to the outcome, but then you get Sam at the back who's a bigger problem. He's kind of a negative externality, a new thing that comes in, and very often he'll then feed back into the original problem. So he's like a worse version of me. And that then gets you in that kind of vicious cycle, and that's, you know, a really good way to win a debate from often. Sam?
You may have covered this, but what if someone says something you just know is a lie?
But you don't?
You just know that they're saying an untruth.
Well, if you know they're saying an untruth, then you can say that, you know, you can call them on it. What you won't do is ask them to specifically produce a piece of evidence in the round that, you know, will prove one way or the other. So, I mean,
how would you do that? How would you do that? How would you point out that someone's a liar?
Well, you wouldn't, like, again, this is quite an interesting point because in Parliament in the UK you can't call anyone a liar. Like, it's not parliamentary language to say this gentleman is a liar. He's telling lies. and although sometimes in debates you will kind of use that kind of language, in general what you'll do is give analysis to explain why what they're saying is wrong. So, I mean, somebody might say, well, of course, the president of France, Jacques Chirac, has put in place this policy to ban Americans from travelling to France. And that's just obviously not true. So the judges, hopefully, if they're kind of switched on individuals who know what's going on, should be able to work out that that's not the case. And you'd say that in the debate. Well, it's interesting that the speaker thought that Jacques Chirac was president. Obviously, he's not. Nicolas Sarkozy took office just 6 months ago, and blah, 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 and kind of move on from there. The important thing is to try and persuade people that you're the one telling the truth.
But would you do a point of information?
Yeah, of course. If they're in the time when you can, they might not take it. And if they're telling a lie, and they know they're telling a lie, they'll probably say no, strategically, because they won't want you to call them out. But that's sometimes, you can tell when speakers are kind of on the back foot, because lots of people, a whole bench can rise at once. So somebody's making an outrageous point and saying something that's just wrong, and you'll see, it's 4 people will stand up all at the same time. And they'll look really worried and be like, no, thank you, sit down. And then often you know that that's, you've got them on the ropes because they're not willing to engage. But having said that, you can't answer a point obviously every time because you've got limited time to do it. There was a question there. Yeah.
If first off were to attack the link between the solution and the outcome, would it be contradictory if second off were to attack the fact that he might not be the solution?
Yes, probably. I mean, in opposition it's slightly different because there are different strategies that you can employ. So we have sometimes like even if scenarios where people will sometimes say fine, we'll accept the logic that they've given, and let's just say pretend that what the first team in the debate have said is wrong. Let's say even if that situation occurs, then let's look at the next logic and the next kind of shift for dealing with the outcome, or like adding in an externality. Generally, though, if your bench is like taken on board some kind of general idea or philosophy about something, it would be a knife if you sort of stood up and said, well, obviously what they've told you is a load of crap. We're just going to go on and do our own thing and ignore what they've said. I need to kind of think of some instances of where what you're saying might occur to give a more clear answer. But basically, you just have to kind of be relatively loyal to your side whilst not directly contradicting or moving too far away from what they've set up as the team's case. Is that an answer? Sort of? Yeah.
Excellent.
Good. Okay, so that's it pretty much. We'll be around all day, so...
Well, they're going to be debating.
Apparently we're debating as well.
They're going to be debating you. Now, so a good point of information might be, didn't you say this morning not to do that? But I just want to say that although they are going to debate, they will not be advancing to the elimination rounds or winning speaker awards. They've already won many prestigious awards. But I think they can show us how to do things better by being active role models in the debate. The other thing is that none of the University of Vermont teams will advance to the semifinals, right? So they're just going to try to stop all of you from advancing to the semifinals. So I think there's a lot of chance for people here to be debating in the semifinals. Because, of course, none of the Vermont teams are clear, but these guys probably would. So that's going to happen. And why don't you take a break for until 10 o'clock, and then let's get ready to rumble. All right, hey, give it up. Where's your loyalty? Give it up.